the American West, 1880, where the sky was painted in red dust and hearts bore scars just as deep. Among forgotten towns, echoing gunshots and midnight whispers, lived stories never written in books, only passed down through memories and tears. This is one of those stories, about a woman left behind, a man who thought he had lost everything, and a land that could either bury you or redeem you. If you love emotional stories like this, don't forget to hit like, share it with others, and leave a comment below. And where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. We'd love to see how far our Western-loving community reaches. Now, let's watch till the very end, because some endings will stay with you forever. Cowboy Hat.
In the dusty heart of Wyoming Territory, 1885, a story unfolded that would be whispered about for generations. Sarah Winters arrived with nothing but a worn carpetbag and letters promising a fresh start. What she found instead was a mysterious stranger sleeping in her borrowed barn, his weather-beaten face hiding secrets deeper than the nearby creek beds. He wasn't just any drifter. His saddlebag bore the prestigious Cooper family crest, marking him as the vanished millionaire rancher folks had been searching for these past months. Most women would have raised the alarm, but Sarah saw something in his eyes that spoke of the same loneliness she carried. Could one night of honest conversation by lantern light truly change the course of two lives forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The train whistle pierced the October air as Sarah Winters pressed her forehead against the dusty window, watching the endless Wyoming prairie roll past. Her fingers absently traced the edges of the bundle of letters in her lap, 12 pages, of careful correspondence that had led her to this moment. The cream-colored paper had grown soft at the corners from countless readings, each word memorized like a prayer. Final stop, Whispering Pines. The conductor's voice carried through the passenger car, heavy with the weariness of a 3-day journey. Sarah gathered her carpetbag, the worn leather telling its own story of better days in Boston. At 32, she was perhaps older than most mail-order brides, but loss had taught her that time measured differently out here in the West. The platform brought the first shock of frontier reality. Wooden planks weathered gray beneath her. Feet, so different from Boston's polished stations. A handful of people milled about, their clothes bearing the practical dust of ranch life. Sarah straightened her back, smoothing her navy traveling dress with hands that trembled only slightly. The Frontier Placement Agency's letters had prepared her for many things, but standing alone on this platform, she realized no words could truly capture this moment. Mrs. Henderson waited exactly where she'd promised in her last letter, a sturdy woman in her 50s, gray-streaked hair tucked beneath a practical bonnet. Her eyes, sharp but kind, assessed Sarah with the direct gaze of someone used to making quick judgments. "Miss Winters?" She stepped forward, extending work-roughened hands. "Welcome to Wyoming Territory. I trust your journey was peaceful." "As peaceful as 3 days on a train can be," Sarah replied, managing a smile. "Thank you for meeting me, Mrs. Henderson, and for the generous offer of lodging until—" She let the words trail off, not quite ready to voice the rest, until she met the man who'd answered her advertisement, a rancher named Michael Brooks, who'd written of wanting a practical wife with a good head for figures. "Come along then. My wagon's just beyond the station. We'll have you settled in the cottage before sundown." Mrs. Henderson's efficiency was comforting in its own way. "It's not much, just the small place behind my farm with that old barn, but it's clean, and it'll serve until your intended returns from his cattle drive." They loaded Sarah's modest belongings into the wagon, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the street. Sarah caught fragments of whispered conversations as they passed the general store. Another mail-order bride? Awful. Late in the season? Brave or foolish? But she'd learned long ago that other people's judgments were poor shelter in life's storms. The death of her parents, followed by her younger sister's passing from influenza, had taught her that security lay in one's own hands. Teaching at Boston's girls' school had provided a respectable living, but not the chance to build something of her own. When she'd seen the advertisement seeking educated women willing to start fresh in Wyoming territory, it had felt like Providence opening a door. The road to Mrs. Henderson's farm wound past the edge of town, where buildings gave way, to open range dotted with late autumn sage. The air carried a crispness that spoke of winter's approach, along with something else. Possibility, perhaps, or maybe just the wild freedom that seemed to rise from the very soil of this untamed land. Your Mr. Brooks should return within the fortnight, Mrs. Henderson offered as they crested a small rise. He's a decent man by all accounts, keeps his word, pays his debts. The cottage is just ahead, there, past that stand of cottonwoods. Sarah nodded, though her attention had shifted to the small structure that would be her temporary home. Whitewashed. Walls glowed in the setting sun, a curl of smoke from the chimney promising warmth within. Behind it stood the barn Mrs. Henderson had mentioned, its weathered boards holding whatever secrets such places kept in this vast territory. As they drew closer, Sarah felt something settle in her chest, not quite peace, but its quiet cousin, resolve. Whatever waited in this new life, she would meet it with the same quiet strength that had carried her this far. She couldn't know then, as Mrs. Henderson's wagon creaked to a stop, that fate had already set in motion events that would test that strength before the next dawn's light. Night settled over the cottage like a heavy quilt, bringing with it the unfamiliar sounds of prairie wind and distant coyotes. Sarah had spent an hour arranging her few possessions, each item a small comfort against the vastness of her new world. The cottage offered simple amenities, a pot-bellied stove, a narrow bed with a fresh-smelling quilt, and a sturdy table beneath the window where she'd placed her mother's silver candlestick. A sudden rustling from the barn drew her attention. Mrs. Henderson had mentioned nothing about livestock, and in these parts, even the smallest detail could matter. Sarah lifted the lantern from its hook, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Common sense suggested she wait until morning, but 5 years of managing unruly students had taught her that problems rarely improved with neglect. The barn door's hinges protested softly as she eased it open, lantern light pushing back the shadows. The familiar sense of hay and old wood reminded her of childhood visits to her grandfather's farm in Vermont, but something else caught her attention, the distinct aroma of coffee, fresh brewed and recent. "Hello." Her voice carried steady, betraying none of the tension gathering between her shoulders. "I don't mean to intrude, but this is Mrs. Henderson's property." Movement in the corner, a shadow detaching itself from deeper shadows. Sarah raised the lantern higher, her free hand finding the solid presence of a supporting beam. The light revealed him in stages. First boots, well-made but trail-worn, then dark trousers and a cotton shirt that had seen better days. Finally, his face came into view, weathered by sun and wind, framed by dark hair that curled slightly at the collar. But it was his eyes that held her attention, deep brown, and carrying a weariness that spoke of more than physical exhaustion. "My apologies." "Ma'am?" His voice matched his appearance, cultured beneath the trail dust. "I meant to be gone before anyone discovered me." He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man used to having his movements watched. A saddlebag lay near his makeshift bed in the hay, and Sarah's breath caught, as lamplight caught the emblem tooled, into the leather. An intricate C surrounded by a crown of wheat sheaves, the Cooper family crest. Every soul in Wyoming territory would recognize it, though few had seen it up close. The Coopers were railroad prosperity made manifest, their ranch holdings vast enough to make lesser men weep, and their youngest son, James, had vanished 6 months ago, leaving behind a fortune and a flood of speculation. "You're him, aren't you?" The words left her before she could consider their wisdom. James Cooper. His shoulders tensed, but he made no move toward her. If anything, he seemed to draw further into himself. The name hasn't brought me much peace lately. I'd be grateful if you'd forget you saw it. Sarah should have been afraid. Should have run for the sheriff, or at least back to the cottage to bolt the door. Instead, she found herself studying him with the same careful attention she'd once given to difficult passages in her father's books. You look like you could use a proper cup of coffee, Mr. Cooper, and perhaps something more substantial than trail bread. Surprise flickered across his features, followed by something that might have been amusement. Most people who recognize me these days are more interested in the reward my family's offering. I'm not most people. Sarah surprised herself with the touch of steel in her voice. I'm a mail-order bride who's currently without her intended husband, living in a borrowed cottage and talking to a millionaire in a barn. I'd say we're both somewhat outside the ordinary. A genuine smile touched his lips then, brief but transformative. A mail-order bride? Recently arrived from Boston. She adjusted her grip on the lantern. I have coffee on the stove and enough stew for two, assuming you can convince me you're not here to cause trouble. I've had enough of that for one lifetime. James. Cooper studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached down and lifted his saddlebag with the careful movement of a man nursing hidden hurts. I've never been much good at causing trouble, ma'am. Just at disappointing expectations. Then we have something in common. Sarah turned toward the cottage, not looking back to see if he followed. And my name is Sarah Winters, not ma'am. If we're going to share a meal, we might as well use our proper names. The sound of his boots on the packed earth told her he'd chosen to follow. Later she would wonder at her own certainty, not in his harmlessness, but in the recognition of something. Familiar in his eyes, the same quiet desperation for a new beginning that had carried her across half a continent. The cottage's warmth wrapped around them like a tangible thing, broken only by the soft clink of spoons against bowls. Sarah had insisted James take the chair closest to the stove, noting how he favored his left side. The lantern between them cast shifting shadows on the whitewashed walls, turning the small room into something almost intimate. You're a good cook, James offered, breaking the comfortable silence. His trail-worn appearance contrasted sharply with his careful manners. Each movement measured, deliberate. My mother's recipe. Sarah poured more coffee into his cup, the rich aroma mingling with wood smoke. She believed every proper lady should know how to make at least one meal that could warm both body and soul. Sounds like a wise woman. She was. Sarah settled back in her chair, watching him over the rim of her cup. She taught at the girls' school where I later worked. Said education wasn't just about books. It was about preparing young women for whatever life might bring. James's eyes met hers, something shifting in their depths. And did it prepare you for this? For finding a runaway millionaire in my borrowed barn? The corner of her mouth lifted. I don't recall that particular lesson, though she did teach me to trust my instincts about people. And what do your instincts tell you about me, Miss Winters? Sarah considered him carefully. The lamplight softened the weather-hardened edges of his face, revealing hints of the man he might have been before whatever storm had driven him from his family's empire. They tell me you're running from something bigger than the law. No one walks away from what you had without a compelling reason. He set his empty bowl aside, his hands coming to rest on the table. Strong hands, marked by recent work rather than the softness of wealth. Sometimes what you're running from and what you're running to are the same thing. Freedom, she hazarded, remembering her own journey west. Truth. The word fell between them like a stone in still water. Do you know what it's like, Miss Winters, to wake up one morning and realize everything you thought you knew about your life was built on carefully constructed lies? Sarah thought of the telegram that had shattered her own world 3 years. Ego, her sister's death, the discovery of embezzled school funds that had paid for desperate treatments. Yes, she said simply, I do. Something in her tone must have reached him, because he looked up sharply, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. "Tell me," and so she did. The words came easier in the lamp's gentle light, spinning out the story of a younger sister's illness, of funds mysteriously appearing for treatments that should have been beyond their means, of discovering after Emily's death that their father had been taking money from the school's accounts, small amounts at first, then larger sums as desperation grew. "I repaid every penny," she finished quietly. "It took 3 years of teaching extra classes, living on barely nothing. The board never pressed charges out of respect for my father's memory, but everyone knew. The whispers followed me everywhere. So, you came west." "So I came west." She managed a small smile. "Your turn, Mr. Cooper." James was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. "I found ledgers," he finally said, "hidden in my father's study. They showed how the Cooper fortune was really built, not just on railroad contracts and cattle, but on broken treaties with native tribes, on land stolen through forged documents, on rivals who mysteriously lost everything just when they were about to challenge our interests." The bitterness in his voice spoke of shattered illusions. "I confronted him. He said it was all for the family, that empire building required difficult choices, called it the price of progress." James's laugh held no humor. "When I threatened to take the evidence to the authorities, he offered to make me full partner, said it was time I learned how the world really worked. So you left instead, with nothing but what you see. Spent 6 months working ranch jobs, under assumed names, trying to figure out how to make things right without destroying everyone I've ever loved." He looked down at his hands. "My mother's health is fragile. The shock of a public scandal." Sarah reached across the table, her fingers brushing his wrist. The contact was brief but electric. "Sometimes the right path isn't the easiest one." "No," he agreed softly, "but sometimes the hardest road leads exactly where you need to go." His eyes met hers again, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits, shaped by difficult choices. The clock on the mantel chimed midnight, startling them both. Sarah realized they'd been talking for hours, the stew long cold in its pot, yet neither made any move to end the evening. "Tell me about Boston," James said, refilling their cups. "Tell me about teaching at your school." And so the night deepened around them, their conversation flowing as naturally as the creek behind the cottage. They spoke of books they'd loved, of dreams they'd held, of the small moments that had shaped their lives. With each passing hour, the weight of their respective pasts seemed to lift slightly, replaced by something lighter, possibility, perhaps, or hope. The first hint of dawn crept through the cottage windows, painting the room in pearled light. Sarah stood at the stove, preparing fresh coffee, aware of James watching her from his place by the window. They'd talked through the night, their conversation, winding through memories and hopes until the line between stranger and confidant had blurred beyond recognition. "The town will be waking soon," she said, more to fill the growing silence than anything else. The morning light brought with it the weight of decisions to be made, paths to be chosen. "I should go." James spoke the words without moving, his voice carrying an undertone she hadn't heard before. "Before anyone sees me here." Sarah turned to face him, coffee forgotten. In the grey light of dawn, he looked both more and less than the mysterious stranger she'd found in her barn. More human, perhaps, with his guard lowered by hours of honest conversation, but also more troubled as reality pressed in around them. "And where will you go?" The question came softly, but it held the weight of everything they'd shared through the night. "I've been thinking about heading north, maybe into Montana territory." He straightened from his lean against the wall, wincing slightly at the movement. "There's a Crow settlement there, where I once helped negotiate a fair grazing agreement. They might help me figure out how to make things right, without destroying my family completely." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. Alone. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. James crossed the small room slowly, coming to stand before her. This close, She could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the way his mouth held both strength and gentleness. Sarah. Her name on his lips sent a shiver through her. In these past hours, you've shown more understanding, more true nobility of spirit than I've found in a lifetime among society's finest. You deserve better than a man running from his past. Perhaps, she agreed, meeting his gaze steadily. But I've chosen a man running toward truth. There's a difference. His breath caught audibly. What are you saying? I came west for a fresh start, to marry a man I'd never met. She gestured to the bundle of letters on the table. Mr. Brooks seems like a decent enough person on paper, but in all his letters, he never once spoke of truth or justice or making things right. You've shown me more of your real self in one night than he has in months of correspondence. Sarah. Her name came out rough with emotion. You can't mean marry me. The words surprised them both, but Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. Not because you need help with your mission, though I would give it gladly. Not because I need saving from a loveless marriage. Marry me because in one night of honest conversation, we've found something most people spend lifetimes searching for. James reached out slowly, his calloused fingers brushing her cheek. You'd walk away from a secure future to join a man with nothing but troubles to his name. You have more than troubles to your name, James Cooper. She leaned slightly into his touch. You have integrity. You have courage. And unless I'm very much mistaken, you have something else that neither of us expected to find in a borrowed barn in Wyoming territory. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked very much like hope. From his pocket, he withdrew a ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl, worn smooth with age. My mother's, he explained softly. The only thing of value I took when I left. She gave it to me years ago, said to save it for when I found someone who could see past the Cooper name to the man beneath. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as he took her hand. The minister lives just past the general store, she whispered. He's usually up at dawn for morning prayers. It won't be easy, James warned, even as his fingers slipped the ring onto her hand. My family will fight this. The truth I'm carrying could cost us everything. Or it could be the foundation for something better. She looked down at the ring, then back to his face. Sometimes the most precious things are built on difficult beginnings. The sun was rising properly now, painting the eastern sky in shades of promise. They stepped out of the cottage together, the morning air crisp with autumn's bite. Sarah paused only long enough to leave a note for Mrs. Henderson, a simple explanation and her deepest thanks. Then, hand in hand, they walked toward town, toward whatever future they would forge together. Behind them, the worn carpet bag and the saddlebag with its Cooper crest waited side by side, two different paths merging into one. Ahead, the town was just beginning to stir, unaware that the morning's light would bring a story that would be whispered about for generations to come. Words spread through whispering pines like wildfire in dry grass. By the time Sarah and James emerged from Reverend Morrison's small church, the street had filled with townsfolk barely pretending to go about their morning business. The newly risen sun caught the simple pearl on Sarah's ring finger, and the whispers rose like wind through prairie grass. That's James Cooper himself, the mail-order bride? But wasn't she promised to? 6 months missing, and now this. Sarah held her head high, her hands steady in James's as they descended the church steps. The Reverend's wife had served as their witness, her weathered face showing neither judgment nor approval as she signed the marriage certificate. Now that same document rested in Sarah's pocket, its fresh ink barely dry. Clarence Whitaker, editor of the town's weekly newspaper, pushed through the gathering crowd. His pencil was already flying across his notepad. Mr. Cooper, the territory's been searching for you these 6 months past. Your family's offered a substantial reward. I'm aware of the reward, Mr. Whitaker. James's voice carried the quiet authority of his breeding, though his grip on Sarah's hand tightened slightly. Though I trust your paper would be more interested in announcing my marriage to Miss Sarah Winters, now Mrs. Cooper. The pencil stilled. Married, but she only arrived yesterday, meant for plans change. Sarah interjected smoothly. Years of handling delicate school matters evident in her tone. Mr. Brooks will understand, I'm sure, when he returns from his cattle drive. Martha Jensen, owner of the general store, stepped forward. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, not the way James stood protectively close to Sarah, nor the fine quality of his trail-worn clothes. Your family's been frantic, young man. Your mother's health has always been used to manage me. The words came quietly, but with steel beneath them. I trust she's still making her weekly trips to the dressmakers, Mrs. Jensen? A flush coloured the shopkeeper's cheeks. Everyone knew the Cooper matriarch's delicate health had never interfered with her social obligations. The crowd parted as Mrs. Henderson's wagon rolled up, the older woman's expression a mix of exasperation and confused concern. Sarah, I found your note, but surely this is the right decision, Sarah finished firmly, meeting her temporary landlady's gaze. Though I'll still need to collect my things from the cottage, if you'll permit it. Sheriff Tucker materialized from the gathering crowd, his badge catching the morning light. Mr. Cooper, there are some questions need answering about your disappearance. Your father's lawyer left papers, and I'll answer them, Sheriff. James's voice remained steady. But first, I'll see my wife safely settled, unless you're suggesting I'm under arrest? The sheriff's weathered face showed the calculation behind his eyes. No local lawman would risk arresting a Cooper without ironclad cause, no matter how unusual the circumstances. No arrest, he said finally, but I'll expect you both at my office before sundown. Sarah felt James relax slightly beside her. You'll have our full cooperation, Sheriff. Now, if you'll excuse us. They moved through the parting crowd toward Mrs. Henderson's waiting wagon. Sarah caught fragments of conversation that painted the full picture of what they faced. Poor Mr. Brooks. To lose his bride to a Cooper. Always knew that family had secrets. Marriage won't protect him if there's real trouble. Mail order bride for less than a day, and now she's one of the richest women in the territory. The last comment stung more than Sarah expected. She'd spent years rebuilding her reputation after her father's scandal, and now some would see her as nothing more than an opportunist. As if reading her thoughts, James helped her into the wagon and spoke softly, for her ears alone. They'll talk regardless of what we do. The truth of us belongs to no one else. Mrs. Henderson clucked to her horses, turning them toward the cottage. Her silence spoke volumes, but when she finally spoke, her words surprised them both. I suppose I'll need to send word to Mr. Brooks that his intended has found another path, though something tells me there's more to this story than meets the eye. Yes, ma'am, James acknowledged. More than most would believe. Well then, the older woman's hands were steady on the reins. Perhaps you'd best tell me what kind of storm we're brewing here, before it breaks over all our heads. Sarah looked at her new husband, saw the weight of decision in his eyes. They'd agreed during their dawn conversation that they'd need allies, people of substance who could stand witness to the truth when the time came. Mrs. Henderson, with her quiet authority and connections throughout the territory, could be just such an ally. It's a long story, Sarah said carefully, one that goes to the heart of how fortunes are made and lost in this territory. Child, Mrs. Henderson's voice held a lifetime of frontier wisdom. All the important stories do. Now let's get you packed and settled somewhere more private than my cottage. Something tells me you'll both need a proper fortress before this tale plays out. The wagon rolled on through the awakening town, leaving a wake of speculation behind it. By sunset, the story would reach every corner of the territory. By dawn, it would be racing toward the Cooper estate on telegraph wires. The wheel of consequence had begun to turn. The telegram arrived at the Cooper estate while the family sat down to breakfast. Sarah could almost picture the scene, having heard enough from James during their night of revelations to imagine the massive oak dining table, the sterling silver service, the starched perfection of the morning ritual. She wondered which servant had brought the message that would shatter their carefully maintained facade. Now, in the fading light of day, She and James sat in the private parlor of Whispering, Pine's only hotel, waiting. The town's telegraph operator had warned them. Thomas Cooper, James's older brother, was arriving on the evening train. They'd spent the day preparing, meeting with Sheriff Tucker, securing rooms at the hotel, and most importantly, retrieving James's carefully hidden evidence from a lockbox at the town's small bank. "He'll try to charm you first," James said, his voice tight with knowing. "Thomas has always been father's perfect heir, smooth, calculated, ruthless when required." Sarah adjusted the cuffs of her best dress, the one she'd planned to wear when meeting Mr. Brooks. "And when charm fails? Threats, most likely, though he'll call them reasonable alternatives." James paced to the window, watching the street below. "The Cooper family doesn't handle defiance well." The distant whistle of the approaching train cut through the evening air. Sarah rose, smoothing her skirts with steady hands. Then, perhaps it's time they learned. The knock came 20 minutes later, 3 sharp raps that spoke of authority accustomed to immediate response. James opened the door to reveal a man whose resemblance to him was striking, yet somehow fundamentally different. Where James wore his prosperity like a discarded coat, Thomas Cooper wore his wealth like armor. "Little brother." Thomas stepped into the room, his tailored suit pristine despite the long journey. His gaze swept past James to Sarah, assessment sharp behind his practiced smile. "And this must be the bride, Mrs. Sarah Cooper," she corrected firmly, meeting his eyes. "Please, won't you sit down?" Something flickered across Thomas's face. Surprise, perhaps, at her direct manner. He chose the room's best chair, every movement calculated for effect. "I must say, James, you've outdone yourself this time. Running away was dramatic enough, but marrying a mail-order bride, mother's beside herself—" "Is she?" James remained, standing, positioning himself subtly between his brother and Sarah. "Or is she playing her usual role in father's performance?" "Don't." Thomas's smile thinned. "Don't taint mother's genuine concern with your crusade." He turned to Sarah, his tone shifting to velvet. "My dear, you must understand. You've been drawn into a rather delicate family matter, one that could have unfortunate consequences for everyone involved." Sarah felt an odd calm settle over her, the same steadiness that had served her during school board inquiries into her father's actions. "How fascinating." "I was about to say the same to you." Thomas blinked, his practiced sophistication slipping for just a moment. "I beg your pardon. Your brother has shared everything with me, Mr. Cooper. The ledgers, the land deals, the broken treaties. A wife can't testify against her husband in court. Did you know that? But she can certainly verify the existence of evidence, should anything unfortunate happen." The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas's face underwent a remarkable transformation, charm falling away to reveal something harder. "I see James has found himself a clever ally, but cleverness won't protect you from what's coming. Do you really want to be part of destroying one of the territory's most prominent families? Think of the consequences, not just for us, but for every business, every worker who depends on Cooper interests." "We're not trying to destroy anything," James interjected. "The truth doesn't destroy, Thomas. It cleanses." "Truth?" Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The truth is that empire building has never been a clean business. Father understood that. I understand that. Why can't you? Because some prices are too high." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "Your brother is trying to find a way to make things right without causing unnecessary harm. I suggest you consider helping him rather than threatening us." Thomas rose, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "I came here prepared to be generous, to offer you both a way to save face, a substantial settlement for the new bride, a position abroad for my wayward brother, all very civilized, and all very impossible," James said. "Go home, Thomas. Tell Father that this time buying silence isn't an option." "You're forcing my hand, then?" Thomas moved to the door, his face hardening. "So be it. But remember, I tried to be reasonable." He paused, his hand on the doorknob. You have until noon tomorrow to reconsider. After that, things will become difficult. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow held more menace than a slam. Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Charming family you have. James's laugh held a touch of genuine amusement, and that was one of our more civil conversations. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Sarah, there's still time. You could... She silenced him with a finger to his lips. Don't. We made our choice at dawn, remember? Whatever comes, we face it together. Outside their window, lamps were being lit along the town's main street, pushing back the gathering darkness. Somewhere in that darkness, Thomas Cooper was already setting plans in motion. But here in this room, Sarah felt an odd sense of peace. They had truth on their side, and sometimes that was the strongest weapon of all. In the quiet hours after Thomas's departure, James spread the contents of his lockbox across their hotel room's writing desk. Sarah lit extra lamps, their golden light illuminating decades of careful documentation, ledgers, land deeds, correspondence, that traced the rise of the Cooper Empire like a map of shifting morality. This is where it began, James said, carefully unfolding a yellow document. 1858, my grandfather's first ranch purchase. His fingers traced the signatures at the bottom. Notice anything strange about the seller's mark? Sarah leaned closer, her years of teaching handwriting serving her well. The X is too precise. Someone used to signing their name trying to look illiterate. Exactly. James's voice held quiet approval. The supposed seller was a Cheyenne chief who'd been educated at a mission school. He could write in both English and his native language. But somehow, on this deed, he made his mark instead. The document trembled slightly in his hands. Sarah covered them with her own, steadying both paper and man. Tell me the whole story. Help me understand what we're really fighting for. James drew a deep breath, looking around their room as if seeing beyond its walls to the past itself. The Coopers weren't always wealthy. My grandfather worked as a scout for the railroad surveys, learned which lands would be valuable once the tracks were laid. He was clever, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. He selected another document, this one bearing an official territorial seal. By the time my father inherited the ranch, the pattern was set. Land grabs disguised as legal purchases, cattle brands that mysteriously changed, small ranchers who found themselves in sudden debt, forced to sell at pennies on the dollar. And your father continued it? Refined it. James's laugh held no humor. Where grandfather used brute force, father used banks and lawyers. More civilized, he called it. But the results were the same. He lifted a leather-bound ledger. This is his masterwork. 20 years of systematic corruption documented in his own handwriting. He was proud of it, you see. Thought he was teaching Thomas and me how to be proper empire builders. Sarah moved to the window, watching the quiet street below. A drunk stumbled from the saloon across the way, reminding her that life continued, normally for most, even as their own world shifted. You said there were broken treaties. 3 major ones. James joined her at the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Father discovered that the territorial governor had never properly filed several tribal agreements, used that oversight to claim thousands of acres of grazing land. When the tribes protested, he trailed off, the weight of unspoken consequences hanging in the air. The authorities sided with the wealthy rancher. Sarah finished softly. Money speaks louder than justice out here. He turned from the window, his face shadowed. But it wasn't just the tribes. Small farmers, immigrant ranchers, anyone who stood in the way. They all learned that opposing Cooper interests was costly, sometimes fatally so. Sarah thought of her own father, of desperate choices made from love. And now you want to make it right. I have to try. James retrieved a particular document from the desk, handling it with special care. This is the original ranch deed. Before all the expansions, before the empire building, just 500 acres of good grazing land honestly purchased. Everything beyond that was built on lies. What are you thinking of doing? Return what was stolen. Not all at once. That really would destroy too many innocent lives, but systematically, legally. The tribal lands first, then compensation for the smaller ranchers who were forced out. He looked at her, vulnerability clear in his eyes. It will mean living much more simply. The Cooper name might never recover. Sarah picked up his mother's ring from where it rested on the desk, studying how the lamplight played on its modest pearl. This ring, you said your mother gave it to you for someone who could see past the Cooper name. She did. Perhaps she knew even then that the name needed to change, that someone would have to choose truth over empire. Sarah slipped the ring back onto her finger. We'll need help. Allies who understand both law and justice. James gathered the documents carefully, returning them to their lockbox. There's a lawyer in Cheyenne, Samuel Hawkins. He's helped some of the tribes with their land claims. If anyone would know how to do this legally, then we'll go to Cheyenne. Sarah's voice held quiet certainty. But not tonight. Tonight we need rest. Tomorrow will bring its own battles. As if in answer, a dog barked in the distance, the sound echoing off the false-fronted buildings of the town. James secured the lockbox, then drew Sarah into his arms. They stood together in the lamplight, two people choosing to believe that truth could overcome generations of carefully curated power. You're remarkable, James murmured into her hair. Most women would have run screaming from this mess. Sarah smiled against his chest. Most women haven't spent years teaching young ladies that character matters more than circumstances. I should practice what I preached, shouldn't I? His chuckle rumbled beneath her ear. I think you already are, Mrs. Cooper. You already are. Dawn painted the hotel room in shades of possibility as Sarah opened her journal, a simple leather-bound book that had traveled with her from Boston. Her careful handwriting filled the first pages with accounts of the journey west. Now, she faced a blank page with a new story to tell. October 15th, 1885. In less than 2 days, I have gone from mail-order bride to Mrs. James Cooper. The town cannot decide whether to pity or envy me. Perhaps they should save their energy for matters more deserving of attention. A knock at the door interrupted her writing. Mrs. Henderson stood in the hallway, her practical dress and no nonsense. Expression a relief after yesterday's parade of curious onlookers. Good morning, Mrs. Cooper. The older woman's use of her new name carried no judgment. I've brought what you requested. Sarah ushered her in, grateful for her efficiency. They'd asked Mrs. Henderson to retrieve Sarah's carpetbag from the cottage and to make discreet inquiries about hiring a housekeeper. They would need help managing whatever came next. Martha Wilson has agreed to assist you, Mrs. Henderson said, setting down the carpetbag. She's worked for some of our finest families, knows when to speak and when to stay silent. More importantly, she's no friend of Thomas Cooper, not since he foreclosed on her brother's ranch last spring. Sarah nodded, recognizing the value of staff whose loyalty didn't lie with the Cooper family. Please thank her for me. When can she start? This afternoon. And I've taken the liberty of sending word to Madame Beaumont's dress shop. A Mrs. Cooper can't be seen in mail-order bride clothing, no matter how fine it might be for a schoolteacher. The practical reminder of her changed status struck Sarah with sudden force. She sank into a chair, her journal forgotten on the desk. I never thought I'd need to manage a household of this prominence. In Boston, we had one maid for the entire school. Mrs. Henderson's face softened. You managed 50 young ladies and their various dramas. You can manage this. Besides, she added with a hint of steel, from what your husband shared yesterday, you'll have bigger concerns than household management. Before Sarah could respond, another knock echoed through the room. This time a hotel porter stood outside, holding a silver salver with calling cards. Begging your pardon, Mrs. Cooper, but these ladies are most insistent on paying their respects. Sarah took the cards, recognizing names James had mentioned during their night of revelations. Women of prominence in the territory, wives of men. whose fortunes were intertwined with Cooper interests. They're testing the waters, Mrs. Henderson observed dryly, seeing whether you'll sink or swim in their social pool. Then we'd best not keep them waiting. Sarah squared her shoulders, years of managing difficult school board meetings coming to her aid. Would you stay, Mrs. Henderson? Your presence would be most helpful. The parlor of the Whispering Pines Hotel had never seen such a gathering. 4 of the territory's most influential women sat in careful arrangement, their mourning dresses and carefully modulated voices speaking of power wrapped in propriety. My dear Mrs. Cooper, Mrs. Ashworth, wife of the Territorial Bank's president, took the lead. We felt we simply must welcome you properly to our little society. How unexpected your marriage, added Mrs. Blackwood, whose husband owned 3 silver mines. Such a romantic story, though one does worry about hasty decisions, Sarah poured. Tea with steady hands, her Boston education serving her well. Hardly hasty, Mrs. Blackwood. James and I discovered we shared rather profound views on matters of importance. Yes, we'd heard. Mrs. Ashworth's smile didn't reach her eyes. Such concerning rumors about dear James's perspectives on certain business practices. Progress requires difficult decisions, Mrs. Blackwood added. Men like Thomas Cooper understand this. Perhaps, with a wife's gentle influence, James might be persuaded to take a more practical view. Sarah set down her teacup with a soft clink. Ladies, let us speak plainly. You're here to determine whether I'll be an ally or an obstacle in maintaining the status quo. I suggest you consider a third option. I might be a harbinger of necessary change. The silence that followed could have frozen the morning tea. Mrs. Henderson's quiet chuckle broke it. Well said, Mrs. Cooper. Sometimes fresh perspectives are exactly what a territory needs to grow properly. Change can be so disruptive, Mrs. Ashworth observed with careful emphasis. So can the truth, Sarah replied evenly, especially when it's been ignored too long. The social call ended shortly after, leaving Sarah and Mrs. Henderson alone in the parlor. The older woman shook her head in quiet admiration. You handled that well, but they'll be running straight to their husbands with warnings about you. Good. Sarah gathered the tea things with practical efficiency. Let them worry. It might make them more receptive when James presents his proposals for making things right. You're not what anyone expected, Mrs. Cooper. Sarah thought of the journal waiting upstairs, of the story still unfolding on its pages. No, she agreed softly. I'm exactly what James needed. Someone who understands that real strength lies in facing truth, not hiding from it. The morning sun streamed through the parlor windows, catching the pearl on her ring. Somewhere upstairs, James was meeting with his lawyer, planning their next moves. Sarah touched the ring gently, feeling the smooth warmth of its surface. She hadn't come west seeking this particular battle, but now that she'd found it, she would face it with all the courage and grace she possessed. The letter arrived with the afternoon mail, unremarkable among the stack of correspondence Martha Wilson brought up on the silver salver. No return address marked its cream-colored envelope, but the paper was expensive, the kind used in the finest. Offices in Cheyenne. Sarah waited until Martha had left before breaking the seal. The message inside was brief, written in a hand clearly disguised. A Cooper bride should understand that certain arrangements are best left undisturbed. Your husband's crusade for truth threatens more than just his family. Consider carefully whether your new marriage is worth the cost of such disruption. Not all accidents can be prevented, even in the best families. She was still holding the letter when James returned from his meeting with the local land office. One look at her face had him crossing the room in quick strides. What's happened? Sarah handed him the letter wordlessly. His face darkened as he read, jaw tightening beneath his neatly trimmed beard. I should have expected this. Father's influence reaches far beyond our family. Mrs. Ashworth mentioned something at tea about certain business practices being necessary for progress. Sarah moved to stand beside him at the window. How many powerful families are involved in these land deals? Most of them one way or another. James's reflection in the glass looked troubled. The Ashworths, the Blackwoods, the Petersons, they've all benefited from father's methods. Some knowingly, others choosing not to look too closely at their good fortune. A commotion in the street drew their attention. A group of ranch hands had gathered outside the saloon, their voices carrying up to the second floor. "Heard Cooper's son is trying to give land back to the Indians. Next thing you know, he'll be saying we should return the whole territory. Man's gone soft in the head if you ask me." Sarah watched the men, noting how their anger seemed almost rehearsed. "Thomas works quickly. He's had practice." James turned from the window, running a hand through his hair. "When I was 15, a newspaper editor in Laramie started asking questions about some of Father's railroad contracts. Within a week, half his advertisers pulled their business. Within 2, his own printer refused to work with him. By month's end, he'd sold the paper for a fraction of its worth and left the territory. And now, they'll try the same with us?" Sarah retrieved her journal from the desk, adding the threatening letter between its pages. Evidence, she'd learned, from her father's troubles was best preserved in multiple forms. They'll start with intimidation. James's voice held the weight of certainty. Then they'll move to more direct pressure. The bank might suddenly question our drafts. Suppliers could become reluctant to do business. It's an old playbook, but effective. A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha stood there with Samuel Hawkins, the lawyer James had telegraphed from Cheyenne. The attorney's travel-stained clothes suggested he'd ridden hard to reach them. "Mr. Cooper, Mrs. Cooper." Hawkins nodded to them both, his dark eyes sharp, beneath grey brows. "I came as soon as I could. There are developments you need to know about." They settled in the sitting area, Martha bringing fresh coffee before withdrawing discreetly. Hawkins pulled papers from his battered leather satchel. "2 things," he began without preamble. "First, your brother Thomas has filed papers questioning your mental competency, James. Claims your sudden marriage and delusional accusations about family business practices suggest instability." Sarah felt James stiffen beside her. "And the second thing, someone's been asking questions in Boston." Hawkins looked at Sarah. "About your father's involvement with the school funds, Mrs. Cooper. Very detailed questions." The old shame tried to rise, but Sarah pushed it down. "Let them ask. I repaid every penny." "They're not interested in the repayment," Hawkins said quietly. "They're interested in establishing a pattern of moral flexibility in your family, suggesting that perhaps you and James found each other because you both have complicated relationships." With financial truth, the craftiness of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. "They're trying to discredit any evidence we might present." "Standard practice." Hawkins spread more papers on the table. "They'll paint James as unstable and you as opportunistic. Your marriage becomes either the desperate act of a disturbed mind or a calculated grab for wealth and position." "Can they make the competency claim stick?" Sarah asked, practical even as her mind raced. "Not if we move quickly." Hawkins tapped the papers before him. "I've drafted counterfilings, and I have 3 doctors ready to testify to James's sound mind. But we need to act before they can get a friendly judge to issue any restrictive orders." James stood, moving restlessly to the window again. "They'll try to separate us. If they can invalidate the marriage—" "They can't." Sarah's voice held steel. "The marriage is legal, witnessed and consummated. Even if they declare you incompetent going forward, what's done is done." Hawkins nodded approvingly. "She's right. Focus on the evidence you've gathered. Is it secure? Multiple copies." James turned back to them. "In different locations. I learned something from watching Father operate all these years." "Good." Hawkins began gathering his papers. "Because by this time tomorrow, I expect they'll have moved beyond letters and legal maneuvers. Be careful who you trust. Even the walls of this hotel might have ears." After he left, Sarah and James stood in troubled silence. Finally, she moved to her husband, taking his hands in hers. "We knew it wouldn't be easy. This isn't your fight, Sarah. You could still—" "Stop." She pressed his hands firmly. "I chose this. I choose you. We face whatever comes together. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire. Sarah thought it appropriate. They were walking into their own kind of flame, but like all fires, it would either destroy or purify. She intended to ensure it would be the latter. The business ledger lay open on the hotel room desk, its pages illuminated by lamplight. Sarah traced her finger down columns of numbers that told a story far darker than simple profit and loss. James stood behind her, his presence solid and reassuring as she decoded the careful entries. "There," she said, tapping a particular line. "It's just like Father's books when he was hiding the school funds. These numbers don't quite align with the totals, but they're disguised well enough to pass casual inspection." James leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You can see it? 5 years of reviewing school accounts teaches you to spot creative bookkeeping." Sarah pulled a sheet of paper closer, making quick calculations. "These discrepancies, they're regular, monthly, as if someone was being paid off." James straightened, running a hand through his hair. "But who?" A knock at their door interrupted her response. Martha Wilson entered, her usually composed face tight with concern. "Mr. Thomas Cooper is downstairs, sir, with Judge Harrison." James and Sarah exchanged quick glances. The judge's presence at this hour could mean only one thing. Thomas was making his move. "Show them up," James said, while Sarah quickly gathered the ledger and papers, securing them in the hidden compartment they'd created behind a loose panel of wainscoting. By the time Thomas's precise footsteps sounded in the hallway, the desk held only innocent correspondence. Thomas entered like he owned the hotel, Judge Harrison following with judicial gravity. Both men carried leather portfolios that spoke of legal documents within. "Brother," Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Cooper, I trust we're not interrupting anything important?" "Nothing that can't wait," Sarah replied smoothly, noting how the judge's gaze swept the room, lingering on the desk. "What brings you here at this hour?" "Concern, my dear sister-in-law." Thomas settled uninvited into the room's best chair. "Family concern, and a desire to resolve this situation before it becomes unnecessarily public." Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Given the sensitive nature of recent allegations, and considering the petition regarding Mr. James Cooper's current state of mind, we've come to offer a reasonable compromise." "How generous," James said quietly. "And what form does this compromise take?" Thomas opened his portfolio, extracting several documents. "A simple arrangement. You'll enter a private sanitarium in Denver. Very discreet, excellent reputation. Sarah will be well provided for during your recovery. Once you've gained a more balanced perspective on certain family matters, we can discuss your return to suitable responsibilities. And if we refuse?" Sarah's voice held winter's chill. "Then, sadly," Judge Harrison interjected, "we'll have no choice but to proceed with a formal competency hearing. Given the evidence of Mr. Cooper's increasingly erratic behavior." "Evidence you've manufactured," James cut in, "like the evidence in those ledgers you're so desperate to keep hidden." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a flicker of unease quickly masked. "The ledgers you allegedly stole from Father's study? If they exist, they're Cooper family property. Their theft only proves your unstable state." "Interesting choice of words, Thomas. If they exist." Sarah moved to stand beside her husband. "You seem uncertain about documents you just claimed James stole." The judge shifted uncomfortably, but Thomas leaned forward, his mask of concern slipping slightly. "Where are they, James?" "The actual ledgers, not whatever copies you might have made. Father wants them returned." "Father wants them buried, you mean?" James's voice held new certainty. "But it's not just his secrets they contain, are they? That's why you're really here tonight." A tense silence filled the room. Sarah studied Thomas's face, seeing something beneath his controlled expression that hadn't been visible before. "Fear." "The monthly payments," she said softly. "They're to you, aren't they? Your own private insurance against being disinherited." Thomas moved so quickly that Sarah barely had time to step back. But James was faster, placing himself between them. Careful, brother. You wouldn't want to demonstrate any instability yourself. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Thomas hissed. This goes beyond family, beyond father's land deals. There are people who've built empires on the foundations we'd laid. They won't let you destroy everything with your misguided morality. People like Judge Harrison, James asked mildly. Is that why he's here tonight? To protect his own interests? The judge stood abruptly. I won't listen to unfounded accusations. Thomas, this was clearly a mistake. We should pursue the legal channels as planned. Yes, let's discuss legal channels. Sarah retrieved an envelope from her desk drawer. This arrived. Today from our lawyer in Cheyenne. Fascinating reading about certain judicial land grants. Your name appears quite prominently. Your Honor. The judge's face went pale. Thomas surged to his feet, all pretense of fraternal concern abandoned. You're playing a dangerous game, both of you. There are things in motion that can't be stopped. For God's sake, James, be reasonable. Take the sanitarium offer. Let Sarah keep her reputation and a comfortable life. The alternative, he let the threat hang unfinished. Get out. James's voice was deadly quiet. Get out and take your threats with you. But remember, if anything happens to Sarah or me, those ledgers and all the evidence they contain will find their way to every newspaper in the territory. After they left, Sarah sank into a chair, her hands trembling slightly. He's terrified, she said. Thomas, I mean. Whatever he's involved in, it's worse than we thought. James knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. We need to move faster. Get the evidence to Hawkins before they can stop us. They'll be watching the hotel, the telegraph office, every road out of town. Then we'll have to be smarter than they are. James smiled grimly. Fortunately, I learned a few things during those 6 months of hiding, and you, my love, have proven remarkably adept at outmaneuvering them. Sarah squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his touch. Tomorrow, then, we'll need help, people we can trust absolutely. Mrs. Henderson, James nodded, and Martha. They both have reasons to want the truth exposed. Outside their window, a lone horseman rode past, one of Thomas's men, no doubt, watching for any sign of movement. But up here in their room, Sarah felt an odd calm settle over her. They had truth on their side, and each other. Sometimes that was enough to change the course of history. Dawn had barely broken when the Cooper family carriage rolled into Whispering Pines, its polished black lacquer reflecting the early morning light. Sarah watched from their window as Augustus Cooper himself descended, followed by his wife Eleanor. Their arrival transforming the sleepy town's main street into an impromptu theater. He brought Mother. James's voice held complex emotions. She hasn't traveled since her health crisis last spring. Sarah touched the framed family portrait. On their desk, a formal photograph showing younger versions of James and Thomas flanking their seated parents. The glass had cracked during their hasty packing the night before, the break running between James and the rest of his family like a prophecy fulfilled. Are you ready? She asked softly. James straightened his tie, a muscle working in his jaw. They'll try to speak to us separately. Father's favorite tactic, divide and conquer. Then we don't let them. Sarah smoothed her best morning dress, armor of a different sort. Together, remember? The confrontation unfolded in the hotel's private parlor, with Mrs. Henderson and Martha Wilson stationed strategically nearby. Augustus Cooper dominated the room by sheer force of personality, his silver hair and tailored suit speaking of power earned and kept through ruthless determination. James, his voice filled the space like aged bourbon, smooth but with a burn beneath. You've caused quite enough drama, don't you think? Time to end this foolishness. Eleanor Cooper perched on the parlor's best chair, every inch the family. Matriarch despite her supposed fragility. Darling, we're here to help. This enthusiasm for reform, these wild accusations, it's not like you, isn't it? James stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel. Or is it exactly like the son you raised, Mother? The one you taught to value truth above expedience? Truth. Augustus's laugh held no humor. You want truth, boy? Here's truth. You're destroying everything I built, everything I meant to pass. Onto you and Thomas. And for what? Some misguided notion of justice? For what you stole from others, Sarah interjected quietly. For lives ruined and promises broken. Augustus turned to her, really seeing her for the first time. Ah, yes, the mail-order bride. Tell me, my dear, did you think you were marrying into comfort? Security? Is that why you've encouraged his delusions? I married a man of conscience, Sarah met his gaze steadily. Something you might have been once before empire building became more important than honor. Honor? Eleanor's voice sharpened. What do you know of honor, girl? Running from scandal in Boston, trying to reinvent yourself out here in the wilderness. Mother. James's tone held warning. You're speaking to my wife, a wife of 3. Days. Eleanor surged to her feet, her fragility forgotten. This marriage is a sham, a convenient shield for your crusade. Well, it ends now. Thomas has the commitment papers ready. Once you're safely under treatment, no. The word fell like a hammer blow. James crossed to stand beside Sarah. You've played that card already. It failed. Nothing has failed. Augustus's voice turned dangerous. You have no idea what's really at stake here, son. The ledgers you stole, the evidence you think you've gathered. It goes beyond our family. Men of real power are involved. They won't let some idealistic fool with a mail-order bride destroy decades of careful work. Men like Judge Harrison? Sarah asked. Or perhaps the territorial governor himself? Something flickered in Augustus's eyes. Surprise, quickly masked. You're out of your depth, both of you. This is your last chance. End this now. Return what you've taken. Accept the help we're offering. The alternative... He let the threat hang. The alternative is truth, James said quietly. However costly it might be. Truth. Augustus stepped closer, his control slipping. Truth is what I say it is. Truth is what I built from nothing, what I carved out of this wilderness while better men failed. You think those tribes we bought out could have developed this land? You think those immigrant farmers could have built something lasting? I took what they couldn't handle and made it into something great. You took what wasn't yours to take. James's voice held steel now. And you taught Thomas to do the same. The monthly payments in those ledgers. Did you know your eldest son was blackmailing you, father? Insurance against being cut out of the empire? Augustus went very still. Eleanor sank back into her chair, color draining from her face. Thomas wouldn't. Ask him, Sarah suggested. Ask him about the separate accounts, the carefully hidden withdrawals. Ask what he's been protecting himself against all these years. You've done it now. Augustus's voice was deadly quiet. You think you're clever, girl? Playing one son against another? By tonight, you'll wish you'd never stepped off that train. Is that a threat, father? James stepped forward. Because every word you've spoken has been witnessed. Mrs. Henderson. The older woman appeared in the doorway, followed by Martha Wilson and Sheriff Tucker himself. The sheriff's expression was grave. As he stepped into the parlor, I heard enough, he said quietly, including the threat against Mrs. Cooper. I'm afraid you'll need to come with me, Mr. Cooper. We have some questions about certain land deals that have recently come to light. Augustus Cooper looked at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. You've destroyed everything, he said softly. I hope you can live with that. I can live with truth, James replied. Can you? They watched as the sheriff led Augustus away, Eleanor following in tight-lipped silence. The family portrait on the desk caught the morning sun, its cracked glass throwing fractured light across the room like broken dreams. The weather-worn map spread across their hotel room desk showed the major routes between Whispering Pines and Cheyenne. Sarah traced the rail lines with one finger, while James marked alternate trails in pencil, both aware that time was running. Short. Thomas will move quickly now, James said, marking another possible route. With father in custody, he'll try to secure the ledgers before anyone else can see them. Mrs. Henderson's boy saw riders heading east, Sarah added, adjusting the lamp to better illuminate the map's faded details. At least 6 men, well armed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through their window, marking the passage of precious hours. Augustus Cooper's arrest had sent shockwaves through the territory's power structure. Already, telegrams were flying. Between influential families, alliances shifting like sand in a winter wind. Martha Wilson appeared at their door, her face tight with fresh news. Mr. Thomas was seen at the bank, ma'am, meeting with Mr. Ashworth and some men from Cheyenne, and Mrs. Cooper, your mother-in-law. She's taken the afternoon train east. Running to her sister in Denver, James nodded. She'll try to distance herself from whatever's coming. Sarah studied the map again, seeing beyond its geographical markings to the web of power it represented. The railroad junction at Silver Creek. That's where they'll try to stop us, isn't it? It's the bottleneck. James traced the route with his finger. Any traffic to Cheyenne by rail or road has to pass through there. Thomas knows that. A knock at the door brought Sheriff Tucker, his expression grave. You should know, Judge Harrison just released your father on bond. Irregularities in the arrest paperwork, he said. How much time do we have? Sarah asked, already moving to gather their essential documents. Not much. Harrison's given them 24 hours to clarify certain legal matters. After that, the sheriff shrugged eloquently. James rolled up the map, his movements precise. They'll use that time to eliminate any evidence against them. Samuel Hawkins is expecting us. In Cheyenne with the ledgers. You'll never make it by regular means, the sheriff interrupted. They're watching the trains, the stage routes, even the telegraph office. Had to arrest one of Thomas's men for trying to intimidate the operator. Sarah opened their hidden panel, retrieving the crucial ledgers. Then we'll need to be irregular. Won't we? Mrs. Henderson appeared behind the sheriff, her practical face set with determination. My brother runs a way station 12 miles north. He's no friend to the Coopers, not since they undercut his freight business. He'll have fresh horses waiting. And my cousin's boy knows every back trail to Cheyenne, Martha added. He's young, but he's reliable. James looked at Sarah, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded firmly. We knew this might happen. The plans we made? Yes. He turned to their allies. Mrs. Henderson will need your brother's help tonight. Martha, get word to your cousin. Sheriff, don't tell me anything. Tucker held up his hands. Officially, I'm investigating reports of cattle rustling north of town. Won't have time to look for missing persons until tomorrow afternoon. Sarah secured the ledgers in oilcloth, protecting them against any weather they might face. We'll need to split up, she said quietly. They'll be looking for us together. No, James's response was immediate. It's too dangerous. It's our best chance. She touched his arm gently. They'll expect you to protect me, keep me close. They'll never believe you'd let me travel alone. Because I wouldn't, he said roughly. Sarah, these men are looking for a couple traveling together. She smiled slightly. Not a respectable widow visiting her sick sister in Cheyenne, and certainly not a ranch hand delivering horses to the army depot. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. She's right. I have just the outfit for a proper widow. Black bombazine, very correct, and Martha's boy can spare his work clothes. The sheriff cleared his throat. Sun's getting low. If you're going to move, it needs to be soon. James pulled Sarah close, his arms fierce around her. I don't like this. I know. She breathed in his scent, drawing strength from his embrace. But we knew it wouldn't be easy. Trust me to do my part, just as I trust you. They spent the next hour in careful preparation. Sarah changed into the borrowed widow's dress, while James transformed himself into a weathered ranch hand. They divided the ledgers between them, hiding Sarah's portion in her carpet bag beneath feminine necessities, while James's share went into his saddlebags wrapped in horse blankets. Remember, Mrs. Henderson instructed as she adjusted Sarah's. Black veil, you're Mrs. Sarah Wilson, recently widowed, traveling to your sister in Cheyenne. Keep to yourself, speak little, and stay close to other women when possible. And you, Martha told James as she roughened his hands with dirt from the stables, are Jim Watson delivering replacement horses to the army. Don't talk about wages or conditions. Thomas has men among the regular drovers. The sun was touching the horizon when they made their final preparations. Sarah's borrowed mare and James's trail horse waited in the stable behind the hotel. They would leave separately by different routes, with plans to meet at Samuel Hawkins's office in Cheyenne. 2 days, James said softly, holding her one last time. If you're not there by sunset, I will be. Sarah kissed him quickly. I promise. They parted without further words, each carrying pieces of the truth that could reshape the territory's future. Outside, the October wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching winter. Storm clouds gathered in the darkening sky, as if nature itself prepared to hide their escape. The pocket watch that had belonged to James's father marked each precious minute as Sarah's stagecoach approached Silver Creek Junction. She'd been traveling for a day and a half, maintaining her widow's disguise through 2 driver changes and countless stops. The watch, which James had pressed into her hands before they parted, ticked steadily against her heart, carrying its own burden of history. Thunder rolled across the prairie as the stage rattled over increasingly rough terrain. Her fellow passengers, 2 elderly missionaries and a young mother with her infant, paid little attention to the quiet widow in black. Sarah kept her veil lowered, thinking of James somewhere out there on the back trails, carrying his half of the evidence that could change everything. The stage rolled to a stop at Silver Creek Station just as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Sarah gathered her carpetbag close, the ledgers hidden within, suddenly feeling heavier. Through her veil, she saw what she'd been dreading. Armed men lounging too casually near the station door, their eyes sharp despite their relaxed poses. Papers, please. One of them straightened as passengers began descending. Territory's got wolves running. Need to check everyone through. Sarah's heart jumped, but her hands remained steady as she presented her forged documents. Mrs. Sarah. Wilson widow, traveling to her sister in Cheyenne. She'd nearly made it past when a familiar voice froze her in place. Now what have we here? Thomas Cooper emerged from the station office, elegant despite the dusty surroundings. A lady traveling, alone in these troubled times. Before Sarah could react, horses thundered into the yard, riders coming in hard despite the weather. Her heart leaped as she recognized James among them, no longer disguised as a ranch hand, but sitting tall in the saddle like the Cooper he was. Born to be, step away from my wife Thomas. Everything happened at once. Thomas's men reached for weapons while James's riders spread out, creating a protective circle around Sarah. The other passengers scurried for shelter as the rain began. Falling in earnest. Amazing timing, brother. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes, almost like you planned it. We did. Sarah lifted her veil, meeting her brother-in-law's gaze steadily. Your men aren't very subtle when they're watching the stage routes, and you're not as clever as you think. Thomas nodded to someone behind them. Check the lady's carpetbag. Thoroughly. I wouldn't. James's quiet voice carried over the rain. Those ledgers you're looking for, they're already in Cheyenne. What we're carrying is just insurance, copies ready to go to every newspaper in the territory if anything happens to us. Thunder cracked overhead, matching the tension in the air. Sarah saw uncertainty flicker in Thomas's eyes, the same fear she'd noticed in their hotel room confrontation. You're bluffing, but Thomas didn't sound sure. The originals never left that hotel room. Our men searched it thoroughly after you ran. Did you really think James wouldn't learn from watching your father operate all these years? Sarah kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. The ledgers were gone before you even knew we had them. Right now, Samuel Hawkins is presenting them to a grand jury. You're lying. Thomas's control cracked slightly. No grand jury was called by Judge Harrison. Of course not. James urged his horse forward, but Judge Martinez in Cheyenne doesn't. Answer to Cooper money, and he's very interested in land fraud. One of Thomas's men shifted nervously. Mr. Cooper, if they've really got a grand jury... Shut up! Thomas's composure shattered. Nobody leaves until we find those ledgers. Search everything, everyone! That's not happening. James's riders tensed, hands near weapons. Think, Thomas, really think. How does this end? With a shootout at a stage station? More bodies to explain away, more evidence of how far the Cooper... Empire will go to keep its secrets. Sarah saw the moment Thomas realized he'd lost. The rain plastered his expensive coat to his shoulders, making him look suddenly smaller, less certain. You want the truth exposed so badly. His voice shook with rage or fear or both. Fine. But you're not just destroying Father's legacy. Every major family in the territory is tied to those land deals. They'll come for you both. Everything you have, everything you are. It'll all be ashes when they're done. Maybe. Sarah moved to stand beside James's horse, feeling the strength of their connection even in this moment of danger. But we'll face it together, with clean consciences. Conscience? Thomas laughed bitterly. Try feeding a conscience to your children when no honest business will touch the Cooper name. The Cooper name needs this cleansing. James swung down from his saddle, standing beside Sarah. Deep down, you know that, brother. Help us make it right. For a moment, just a moment, something shifted in Thomas's expression. Sarah held her breath, seeing the shadow of the younger brother James had once admired. Then it vanished, replaced by cold fury. Make it right? Thomas spat the words. There's only one thing left to make right. His hand moved for his gun, but James was faster. Years of ranch work had honed reflexes that silk suits and boardrooms had dulled in Thomas. The brothers grappled in the mud as their men shouted and the storm raged overhead. Sarah saw Thomas reach for something in his coat, a flash of metal that wasn't a gun. Without thinking, she swung her carpetbag, heavy with ledgers and evidence. It caught Thomas full in the face, sending him sprawling. The knife he'd drawn skittered away in the mud as James pinned his brother down. It's over, Thomas. Let it be over. Sheriff Tucker's voice cut through the storm. Everyone hold. He and his deputies emerged from the driving rain, weapons ready. Though I've got to say, Mrs. Cooper, that was quite a swing with that carpetbag. Later, they would learn that Mrs. Henderson's network of allies had been watching their backs all along, making sure help arrived at the crucial moment. But right then, as Thomas was led away in handcuffs, Sarah could only lean against James, both of them soaked to the skin, but standing firm. Still think marrying me was the right decision? She asked softly. James pulled out his father's watch, somehow still ticking despite the rain. Best decision I ever made, though I have to admit I never expected to see my wife fell a man with a carpetbag full of evidence. Life, Sarah said with a small smile, is full of surprises. Samuel Hawkins' office in Cheyenne hummed with activity as clerks processed depositions and organized evidence. The new ranch brand James had designed, a simple C bracketed by wheat sheaves, but with a scale of justice worked into the center, lay on the lawyer's desk, a symbol of the changes to come. The grand jury's indictments are just the beginning, Hawkins said, shuffling through papers with practiced efficiency. Judge Martinez has already appointed a special commission to review all territorial land grants from the past 20 years. Your father's arrest has opened floodgates we couldn't have imagined. Sarah sat close to James on the office's leather settee, their shoulders touching. Though they'd dried off and changed clothes after the confrontation at Silver Creek, she could still feel the storm's electricity in her bones. How many families are implicated? She asked, thinking of Mrs. Ashworth's Tea Party warnings. 12 major landholders so far. Hawkins adjusted his spectacles. But here's the interesting part. Some of them are coming forward voluntarily. Seems your stand against the Cooper Empire inspired others to examine their consciences, or protect themselves from worse consequences, James observed dryly. Either way, it serves the cause of justice. The lawyer picked up a particular document. The Blackwoods, for instance, have offered to return 3,000 acres to the Northern Cheyenne. The Petersons are establishing a fund to compensate small ranchers they helped squeeze out. And Thomas? Sarah felt James tense slightly beside her, singing like a meadowlark. Hawkins's expression held grim satisfaction. Turns out he kept his own detailed records. Insurance against exactly this kind of situation. Between his evidence and your father's ledgers, we can unravel decades of fraud. A knock at the door brought Martha Wilson, who'd traveled ahead to Cheyenne to help prepare the lawyer's office. "Begging your pardon, but Mrs. Cooper, your mother-in-law's here." James straightened. "Mother? I thought she'd gone to Denver." "Apparently she had a change of heart." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Would you like to see her alone?" "No." His voice was firm. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Eleanor Cooper entered like a queen in exile, her usual polish somewhat dimmed, but her bearing still regal. She carried a small Morocco leather case that Sarah recognized from James's descriptions, his grandmother's jewelry box. "Mother," James stood, uncertainty clear in his voice. "We didn't expect—" "No, I suppose you didn't." Eleanor's voice held something new, not quite humility, but perhaps wisdom. "I've spent the past 2 days thinking about legacies, about what we truly pass on to our children." She set the jewelry box on Hawkins's desk. "I found myself remembering the woman who gave me that ring you gave your bride, James. Your grandmother was a frontier teacher before she married into the Cooper family. Did you know that?" "No." James glanced at Sarah. "You never spoke of her." "Because it didn't fit the image we were creating." Eleanor's smile held a touch of bitterness. "She taught me that real nobility comes from character, not circumstances. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that lesson, or chose to forget it." Sarah watched her mother-in-law carefully. "And now?" Eleanor opened the jewelry box, revealing documents nestled among the family gems. "Now I'm remembering it. These papers show which parts of the Cooper holdings were legitimately acquired. I won't see my son and his wife destroyed for trying to right wrongs that should never have happened." Hawkins reached for the documents with barely concealed excitement, but Eleanor held up one elegant hand. "A moment, please." She turned to Sarah. "I dealt with you badly, my dear. I saw only what I expected to see, an opportunist trying to rise above her station. I was wrong. We all see what we're prepared to see," Sarah replied quietly. "The question is whether we're willing to look deeper when truth demands it." "Well said." Eleanor smiled slightly. "You'll do very well as the new Mrs. Cooper. Better, I suspect, than I did." She released the documents to Hawkins. "Those show the original boundaries of Cooper land. What my husband's father purchased honestly. Everything beyond that," she straightened her shoulders, "everything beyond that should be made right." James moved to his mother, emotion clear on his face. "The family name will survive." Eleanor's voice held steel, perhaps not with the same wealth or power, but with something better, honor restored. She touched his cheek gently. "Your grandmother would be proud of you, son, and so am I." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as James embraced his mother. Outside the office windows, Cheyenne was coming to life in the early morning sun. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and full of possibility. The new ranch brand caught her eye again, its promise of justice worked into the heart of the Cooper legacy. They would build something different on the foundation of truth, something that would last not because of power or wealth, but because of the strength of its principles. "There will still be challenges," Hawkins warned, looking up from Eleanor's documents. "Other families may not take this change as gracefully as your mother has." "Let them come," Sarah said quietly, moving to stand beside her husband and mother-in-law. "Truth has its own power once you commit to it fully." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "And the Cooper family has a new kind of strength now, one that can't be shaken by loss of mere property." Outside, church bells began ringing, calling the faithful to morning prayers. Their sound carried clearly through the dawn air, marking the beginning of a new day, a new chapter, a new way of living in the truth they'd fought so hard to defend. Spring came early to Wyoming territory that year. Sarah stood in the doorway of their newly built ranch house, watching James work in the kitchen garden she'd started. Her packet of heirloom seeds, a gift from Mrs. Henderson, had arrived just as the soil had thawed enough for planting. The house itself was modest by Cooper standards, built on the original 500 acres that had been legitimately purchased by James's grandfather. But its solid construction and thoughtful design spoke of permanence, of a foundation built to last. "The tomato seedlings are coming up strong," James called, his hands deep in the rich earth. He looked different now, more at peace than the haunted man she'd found in her borrowed barn 6 months ago. "Though I still say it's ambitious to try growing them this far north." "My grandmother grew prized tomatoes in Vermont," Sarah replied, descending the porch steps. "It's all about understanding the soil and respecting the seasons." Much had changed since that dramatic confrontation at Silver Creek. The territorial courts had been busy processing cases stemming from the Cooper ledgers, with Samuel Hawkins working tirelessly to ensure justice was served without causing unnecessary harm to innocent parties. Augustus Cooper had accepted a plea agreement, avoiding prison by providing evidence against others involved in the land fraud scheme. He and Thomas were now in Denver, stripped of most of their wealth, but free to begin again. Eleanor had chosen to remain in Wyoming, moving into a comfortable house in Cheyenne where she was gradually rebuilding her place in society. This time, on more honest terms. "Mrs. Wilson brought over another batch of preserves this morning," Sarah said, kneeling beside James to check the neat rows of planted seeds. Martha had stayed with them, proving invaluable as they established their new household. "She says the general store in town is interested in carrying them." James smiled, remembering how their former housekeeper had blossomed into a respected businesswoman once given the opportunity. Between her preserves and Mrs. Henderson's investment in that freight company, the ladies of Whispering Pines are becoming quite the entrepreneurs. Speaking of business, Sarah brushed soil from her skirts as she stood. Samuel Hawkins' letter arrived. The first group of restored landowners wants to meet about establishing a cooperative banking system. They're tired of relying on the big eastern banks that helped enable the old corruption. A bank owned by the people who actually work the land? James straightened, his expression thoughtful. It could work, especially with someone managing it who understands both numbers and ethics. Sarah caught his meaning and laughed softly. "Are you suggesting the former Boston school teacher might have found her true calling in frontier banking? You've certainly proved yourself skilled at managing complex situations." He drew her close, uncaring of the garden soil on his hands. "And everyone trusts you after the stand we took." The spring breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and new possibilities. In the distance, they could see riders approaching, probably Mrs. Henderson and some of the tribal representatives who were helping them establish fair grazing agreements with neighboring ranches. "Did you ever imagine," Sarah asked, "when you first ran away from your father's empire, that things would turn out like this?" James looked around at their modest but thriving homestead. The barn held just enough horses for their needs. The cattle they'd kept were the ones they could manage properly without exploiting others, and most importantly, they had the respect of their neighbors, earned through actions rather than bought with power. "No," he admitted, "I thought I was choosing between justice and happiness. I never dreamed I'd find both in a borrowed barn." Sarah touched the pearl ring that still graced her finger. "Your grandmother would be proud of what we're building here, a different kind of legacy." Speaking of legacy, James's hand dropped to rest gently on her belly, where the first subtle signs of their coming child had begun to show. "What shall we teach this one about the Cooper name?" "We'll teach them that names are what we make of them," Sarah said firmly, "that wealth isn't just about money, and that true strength comes from standing for what's right." The riders were closer now, and they could see Mrs. Henderson waving in greeting. There would be business to discuss, decisions to make about the future of the territory they all shared. But for this moment, Sarah and James stood in their garden, surrounded by new growth and possibilities. "We should plant an apple tree," Sarah mused, "something that will grow with our family, bear fruit for generations to come." "On one condition," James smiled. "We plant it together." "Always together," Sarah agreed, thinking how far they'd come. From that first night of honest conversation by lamplight, it's the only way to build something that lasts. Around them, the Wyoming spring continued its ancient cycle of renewal. Old wounds were healing, new growth was taking root, and the future stretched out before them like the endless prairie sky, full of challenge, but also full of hope. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Sarah had first arrived in Whispering Pines, she sat in the newly established Territorial Cooperative Bank, recording the day's transactions in a leather-bound ledger. Unlike the shadowy books that had exposed the Cooper Empire's corruption, these pages told a story of community renewal and honest growth. She paused in her careful notation to watch a group of Northern Cheyenne leaders leaving the bank after finalizing arrangements for their cattle trading cooperative. Their partnership with local ranchers, built on mutual respect and fair dealing, had become a model for other territories struggling with land use disputes. The family Bible lay open on her desk, its pages now containing not just the Cooper family history, but also records of the changes they'd helped bring about. Sarah had begun noting not just births, deaths, and marriages, but also the small victories that marked their community's transformation. October 1886, first loans issued by Territorial Cooperative Bank to former tenant farmers establishing their own homesteads. November 1886, Martha Wilson's Preserves ships first orders to Denver merchants. December 1886, Mrs. Henderson's Freight Company opens routes to 3 new territories. January 1887, joint grazing agreement signed between restored landowners and tribal councils. A gentle kick from the child within her brought a smile to Sarah's face. At 8 months along, her son or daughter seemed as eager to participate in their community's growth as his or her parents. The bank's door chimed as James entered, bringing with him the scent of autumn air and honest work. He'd spent the morning helping one of their neighboring homesteaders repair a wind-damaged barn, the kind of mutual aid that had once been common on the frontier before empire building pushed aside cooperation. "Successful morning?" Sarah asked, noting how content he looked in his simple rancher's clothes. "Very. Young Billy Matthews is learning fast. He'll make a fine foreman for his family's restored ranch." James came to perch on the edge of her desk, a habit that would have scandalized the old Cooper banking offices. "And how are our latest accounts?" Growing steadily. Sarah showed him the neat columns of figures. The Wool Producers Collective is ready to expand, and Martha's preserve business needs a larger storage cellar to meet demand. Who would have thought, James mused, that breaking up the old power structure would lead to so much new growth? The afternoon sun slanted through windows that had been washed just that morning by Mrs. Peterson, not out of servitude, but as part of the community labor exchange they'd established. Outside, Whispering Pines hummed with purpose. The general store now stocked goods from local producers alongside Eastern imports. The saloon had become a gathering place for serious business discussions as much as social drinking. "Samuel Hawkins sent word from Cheyenne," Sarah mentioned, closing her ledger. "The last of the major land fraud cases has been settled. He says the territorial governor is using our banking model as an example for other regions facing similar challenges. And father, Thomas," James asked quietly, "doing well in Denver according to your mother's latest letter. Thomas has found work with a newspaper of all things. Apparently exposing corruption has given him a taste for investigative reporting." James laughed softly. "Life does take unexpected turns. Speaking of mother, she's doing remarkable work with that school board position you recommended her for. She understands now what my father knew, that education shapes more than just minds." Sarah gathered her things, ready to head home for the day. "Have you seen today's paper? Mr. Whitaker finally proposed to Mrs. Henderson. About time." James helped her with her coat. "Though I suppose we're hardly ones to talk about conventional courtships." They left the bank together, nodding to friends and neighbors as they walked. The town had changed in subtle but significant ways over the past year. Where once there had been clear divisions between the powerful and the working folks, now there was a sense of shared purpose, of community being built on stronger foundations than mere wealth. At the edge of town, they passed the old Cooper mansion, now converted into a territorial meeting hall and library. Sarah had donated most of her father's books to start the collection, finding healing in turning past shame into future opportunity. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked James, seeing him glance at his childhood home. "The power, the privilege." "No," his answer came without hesitation. "What we're building now, what everyone is building together, it's worth more than all the empires my father ever dreamed of." They continued their walk home, passing the small farms and workshops that now dotted the outskirts of town. Each represented a family building their own future, supported by fair loans and honest opportunities rather than crushed under the weight of corrupt power. The setting sun painted the prairie gold, touching everything with the promise of tomorrow. Their modest ranch house waited ahead, its kitchen garden still producing late vegetables, the young apple tree they'd planted together standing straight and strong against the autumn wind. "We should add today's bank successes to the family Bible," Sarah mused as they approached home, "for the little one to read someday," along with the story of how his mother changed an entire territory by being brave enough to trust a stranger in a barn, along with the story of how his father was brave enough to choose truth over empire, Sarah corrected gently, and how together they found something better than either could have imagined alone. The evening star appeared above their home, bright and steady in the darkening sky. Like the community they'd helped rebuild, it pointed the way toward a future where justice and prosperity could grow together, guided by the simple power of truth and trust. The framed wedding photograph on their mantelpiece had gathered a fine layer of dust, much like the memories of that hasty ceremony 5 years ago. Sarah carefully wiped the glass as autumn sunshine streamed through the windows of their ranch house. The image captured them just as they'd been, James still trail-worn, Sarah in her mail-order bride dress, both of them alight with purpose rather than passion. Yet looking at it now, she could see the foundation of something greater than romance. In their determined expressions, "Mama, tell the barn story again." 4-year-old Emma tugged at her skirts, while baby Thomas dozed in his cradle nearby. Their daughter had inherited James's dark curls and Sarah's steady gaze, along with both parents' unwavering sense of justice. "Again?" Sarah smiled, settling into the rocking chair. "Don't you tire of hearing how your papa was hiding in Mrs. Henderson's barn?" "He wasn't hiding," Emma corrected with the certainty of a child who'd memorized every detail. "He was waiting for you to find him." From his desk by the window, James looked up from the quarterly reports of the territorial cooperative. Bank with a gentle laugh. "Is that how the story goes now?" "That's how all the best stories go," Sarah replied softly. "People finding exactly what they need, even when they're looking for something else entirely." Outside their window, Whispering Pines had grown into a testament to what truth and trust could build. The bank's success had sparked similar cooperatives across 3 territories. Martha Wilson's preserves were now shipped as far as San Francisco, while Mrs. Henderson's freight company had become a model of fair business practices. The old Cooper mansion, now the territorial library and meeting hall, stood as a reminder that power could be transformed into service. Even Thomas, reporting for his Denver newspaper, had written of their community as an example of frontier justice done right. "And they lived happily ever after?" Emma prompted, knowing how her favorite story should end. Sarah gathered her daughter, close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and fresh-baked bread that clung to her pinafore. "No, sweet girl, they lived truthfully ever after, and that's a far better thing." The autumn wind carried the sound of approaching hoofbeats, probably Mrs. Henderson arriving for the afternoon's bank meeting. But for this moment, Sarah held her daughter and watched her son sleep, while her husband's quiet presence filled their home with the kind of wealth that no ledger could ever record. Some stories, she reflected, were too precious for any book to contain. They lived instead in changed hearts, in communities rebuilt, and in the legacy of choosing truth over power, love over empire, one decisive moment at a time.